My name is Marjorie Hale, and I am 71 years old. Some people say age makes you invisible, but in my case, it made me feel as though the walls of my own home had swallowed me whole. For 6 years since my husband Arthur passed, I had lived in this creaking 5-bedroom house on the edge of Asheville, where the Blue Ridge Mountains cradle the horizon. It's a beautiful place, but beauty can be merciless when there's no one to share it with. Arthur used to fill every room with sound, his radio tuned to old jazz, his boots clomping across the floor, his laugh carrying from the kitchen. After he died, the silence became its own creature, settling heavy in the corners. Some mornings, I would brew coffee and set 2 cups out on the table, catching myself halfway, the second mug staring back like a cruel joke. I kept busy with my garden, with books stacked in uneven towers, with the occasional church luncheon. But the truth was, I longed for voices, any voices that weren't just my own muttering through the halls. That's why when the phone rang one gray afternoon and I heard my son Evan's voice on the other end, my heart leapt before I even knew what he wanted. "Mom," he said, his tone clipped but weary. "It's been rough. Claire's filed for divorce. I don't have the house anymore. I've got the kids most of the time and nowhere to stay. Can we come there for a while?" I could hear muffled sounds in the background, my grandchildren. Caleb and Lydia, voices high with a mix of restlessness and worry. My chest tightened, with something like joy and fear tangled together. "Of course you can," I said quickly, before he had the chance to explain further. "This will always be your home." The relief in his exhale nearly broke me. 2 days later, the quiet that had haunted me for years cracked open. The front door swung wide, and in rushed life, Caleb, dragging a duffel bag bigger than him, Lydia clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear half chewed, Evan following behind with the slumped shoulders of a man who had been carrying too much for too long. The house changed almost overnight. Laughter bounced down the halls. The television blared cartoons I hadn't watched in decades. Little feet pounded up and down the staircase, shaking dust loose from banisters that hadn't felt such energy in years. I found myself humming while folding laundry, smiling while cooking. One evening, Caleb sat cross-legged on the rug, asking me to tell him one of the same stories I used to tell Evan at his age. Lydia curled up beside me with her rabbit eyes wide, as if I held the whole world in my hands. And Evan, though tired, though distracted, leaned back in Arthur's old recliner, sipping the tea I'd made, and for the first time in so long, I felt as if we were a family stitched back together. I didn't know then that the very sound I cherished, their voices, their presence, would soon turn sharp, cutting me in ways silence never could. At first, I told myself it was only natural, the friction of 3 generations pressed into one roof. Evan had been through a bitter divorce, and I tried to be patient with the edge in his voice. But it began with little things, the kind that sound harmless until they pile up and weigh heavier than stone. One morning, as I poured oatmeal into bowls for the children. Before school, Evan stood leaning against the counter, his eyes fixed on my hands. "Mom, you should really trim your nails more often," he said. "They look unkempt." I looked down. My nails were a little long, maybe ridged with age, and garden soil still faintly embedded at the corners. I laughed it off, muttering that he'd inherited my same hands. But that night, alone in my bathroom, I sat under the bright, unforgiving light and clipped them as short as I could manage. The next week it was my blouse. A pale blue cotton one Arthur had once said matched my eyes. "Mom, that shirt makes you look sloppy," Evan remarked, pulling at his tie as if it were strangling him. "Maybe it's time you updated your wardrobe." I had worn that blouse for years, soft with washing, comfortable. Still, I folded it carefully, placed it in a bag, and the next day walked into one of the chain stores downtown. Under the fluorescent light surrounded by racks of dresses that seemed built for women half my age, I picked out something newer, sharper. A blouse with crisp lines, the tag dangling heavier than the fabric. Then, one afternoon, as I bent to lift Lydia's backpack by the door, Evan wrinkled his nose. "Mom, sometimes you smell odd. Maybe you should shower more often." He said it quietly, but not so quietly that Caleb didn't look up from his homework. My cheeks burned hot with shame. That night, I scrubbed myself until my skin ached lavender soap, foaming around me as if it could wash away the years. The next morning, I rose early to shower again, as if frequency itself might erase whatever he claimed to notice. I told myself he was right. After 6 years alone, maybe I had slipped, let my standards soften. The house had grown too quiet, and in that quiet, perhaps I'd grown careless. His comments, I reasoned, were just reminders to take better care of myself. He was helping in his way, but the reminders did not stop. At dinner, if my spoon touched the bowl too loudly, his jaw tightened. "Mom, could you chew more quietly?" "It's unpleasant." If I padded through the hall at night on my way to the bathroom, he would sigh the next morning. "Mom, you wake the kids when you walk around. Try to move more quietly." Even the cough I had carried since last winter, the dry tickle that lingered, became cause for complaint. "Could you cough in another room?" It bothers everyone. So I learned to hold my breath when the cough came, pressing my fist to my mouth until my eyes watered. I learned to walk on the balls of my feet, to eat in silence, to shrink smaller in my own home. It was strange how quickly I adapted. As if the woman who had once stood proudly beside Arthur, who had raised Evan through scraped knees and college exams, who had built a life brick by brick, was dissolving into someone else entirely. Someone who lived cautiously, like a guest overstaying her welcome. And yet, when the children laughed or crawled into my lap, I clung to those moments as proof that it was worth it. If small corrections were the price of their company, then I would pay it. But the corrections kept coming sharper each time until I could no longer tell whether they were meant to guide me or to erase me. It happened on a Tuesday evening, one of those dusky mountain nights when the air seems to hold its breath before settling into darkness. I was in the kitchen rinsing the dinner plates when I heard Evan's voice drifting from the porch. He thought he was alone. Caleb and Lydia had already scattered upstairs, and I had slipped quietly into my nightly rhythm of clearing up. The screen door creaked as he leaned against the frame phone pressed to his ear. I couldn't make out who he was speaking to, but his voice carried low at first, then sharper as his frustration rose. "I can't stand it here," he muttered. "It's awful living with her. She's disgusting." The plate slipped from my hands into the sink with a dull thud. Water splashed up onto my blouse, but I barely noticed. My son's voice, my boy. I had rocked to sleep through fevers. The man whose first suit I had ironed before his job interviews was describing me as if I were some nuisance, some unbearable presence. I stood frozen listening as he went on. "Everything she does irritates me. The way she chews, the way she coughs, the way she smells. I feel trapped here, but I've got no other choice until I get back on my feet." Each word pressed down heavier than the last. My skin prickled, not from the draft seeping through the door, but from the shame that spread like fire. For a moment, I wanted to march onto that porch demand. He look me in the eye and repeat every insult. But my feet refused to move. Instead, I dried my hands slowly, as if stalling could soften what I had heard. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, I found him in the living room scrolling through his phone. My heart pounded as I lowered myself into the armchair opposite. "Evan," I said quietly. He looked up, distracted. "Earlier, I heard you talking. On the porch." His eyes flickered, recognition flashing too quickly to hide. Mom, look, whatever you think you heard, I heard you say I was disgusting. My voice cracked on the word, though I tried to steady it. If my presence bothers you so much, maybe you should find another place to live. His mouth opened, then closed again. For a moment, he looked almost like a boy caught stealing cookies from the jar. Then he sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Mom, I didn't mean for you to hear that. I was just venting. You know people say things when they're stressed. It doesn't mean anything. But it did mean something. Every syllable still echoed in my chest. Is it what you really feel? I asked. He hesitated, and in that hesitation the truth lay bare. You know I love you, he said finally. It's just, living together is hard. For everyone. I nodded, though my throat burned. I don't want to be a burden, I whispered. You're not, he replied quickly. Too quickly. Don't talk like that. We'll adjust. He smiled faintly then, but it didn't reach his eyes. The conversation ended there, dangling between us like a frayed rope. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. For years, my home had been my refuge, the one place where I could walk, freely, breathe deeply, be wholly myself. Now I moved through its rooms as if trespassing. The sound of his words clung to me more stubbornly than any smell of cooking or dust. Disgusting. Not lonely, not difficult, not even overbearing, just that. A word that stripped me of everything, except the reminder that I was no longer welcome in the life I had built. The morning it happened began like any other. I rose early, brewed coffee, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the mountains wake under a haze of spring mist. The children were still upstairs dressing for school, and Evan had just come in from the driveway, tossing his keys onto the counter, with the tired heaviness that had become second nature to him. I had scrambled eggs and toast waiting. The kettle whistled sharp and insistent, and for some reason, that sound made me flinch. Evan dropped into a chair, scrolling his phone, his jaw set in a line that told me he'd already had enough of the day before it even began. Mom, he said suddenly without looking up, you already had tea earlier, didn't you? Yes, I answered, buttering a slice of toast. But I thought another cup. Do you really need another one? His tone was flat weary. You're always in here, always fussing with something. I don't know, it's too much. I set the butter knife down, willing myself to stay calm. Evan, if it bothers you, I'll stop. I don't mean to get in the way. He rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand. It's not just the tea. It's everything. His voice carried a sharper edge now. He finally lifted his eyes to me, and what I saw there made my stomach clench. Not annoyance, not fatigue, something harder. What do you mean? My question was almost a whisper. He pushed his chair back an inch as though needing more space. Mom, the truth is, everything about you disgusts me. The words landed like a blade. I must have blinked because the kitchen blurred the edges of the table, the toast cooling on the plate, the steam rising from the kettle. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. He kept going as if the dam had broken. The way you chew, the way you cough, the way you move around the house. It's like old people are just gross. I know it's awful to say, but that's how I feel, and I can't help it. For a moment, the only sound was the kettle still whistling behind me. I reached out and shut it off my hand, moving automatically grateful for the distraction of doing something ordinary. Inside, I felt myself shrinking, folding inward. My own son, the child I had nursed and shielded from the world, was telling me my existence repulsed him. I forced myself to stand straighter, though my voice trembled. Do you really mean that, Evan? He groaned, dragging his hand down his face. Mom, don't make me feel worse. I know it's cruel. I know you're my mother. But I can't change the way I feel when you're around. It's instinct. I'm sorry. I nodded slowly as if we were discussing the weather. My hands found the edge of the counter gripping hard enough to leave crescent marks on my palms. Outwardly, I tried to hold calm, but inside something cold and immovable settled into place. The children bounded down the stairs just then. Caleb asking if I'd packed his lunch, Lydia tugging at her shoelaces. Evan stood quickly, brushing past them with a muttered, "Let's go. We're late." He didn't look back at me. When the door closed behind them, I sank into a chair at the empty table. The toast had gone stale. My hands still trembled. The house, which only weeks before had been full of laughter and warmth, now felt smaller than ever, shrinking to the size of a single sentence that I knew would never leave me. In that silence, I realized something had shifted. I could no longer bend myself smaller to fit the space he allowed me. If my own son found me disgusting, then I would have to decide what was left of me worth keeping. And that decision, I knew, would change everything. The morning after Evan's words, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the toast cooling on my plate, hearing again the way he had said it, flat, tired, unashamed. "Everything about you disgusts me." The phrase had carved itself into me deeper than any knife. I walked through the house slowly, my hand brushing against the walls. Arthur and I had painted together the shelves we had filled with books, the photographs that still smiled down from their frames. This house had been my fortress. But now it felt like a cage where I tiptoed careful not to breathe too loudly. Something inside me shifted. I had spent months, years even trying to adapt, clipping my nails, buying new clothes, walking quietly through my own hallways. But dignity, I realized, was more important than proximity. If my son couldn't see me without contempt, then maybe he shouldn't see me at all. That afternoon, I pulled out an old ledger Arthur once used to track household expenses. Its pages were lined with neat columns, his handwriting still faintly visible in places. I began my own accounting. The Asheville house valued at about $350,000, maybe more, with the new developments creeping up the mountain roads. 2 small rental condos on the east side of town, each bringing in steady tenants, and worth around $125,000 apiece. And in savings certificates of deposit, a modest IRA, and a checking account that had grown fat on years of caution, I held just over $200,000. Altogether, I tallied close to $800,000. Not a fortune by the standards of the glossy magazines at the checkout line, but to me, it was the distillation of a lifetime. Arthur's pension, my librarian's salary, decades of saying no to trips and luxuries, so that yes could be said to the mortgage, to college tuition, to the future. Evan assumed it would one day be his. I had seen it in the way he spoke about eventual plans, the casual way he mentioned the house when talking about what the kids might inherit. He had no idea that his words had already stripped him of that future. 2 days later, I made an appointment with Dr. Ruiz, my attorney, of nearly 30 years. His office sat in an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaky stairs and walls lined with diplomas. He was a careful man, his gray hair cropped close, his voice always steady, never rushed. He listened as I told him what had happened, how Evan had spoken to me. I kept my voice, even though at moments it wavered. When I finished, he leaned back, fingers pressed together. "Mrs. Hale?" He said, "This is a very drastic step. Families fight. Sons say cruel things, especially under stress. Are you sure you want to make decisions you cannot reverse?" "I am sure," I replied. My hands rested calmly in my lap, but inside I trembled. I am not acting out of spite. I am acting to preserve what is left of me. I would rather live alone with dignity than stay where I am treated as if I were filth. He nodded slowly. "Then we will proceed carefully. I can arrange valuations, begin paperwork, and ensure any transfers are secure. But I urge you, take a few days. Do not rush. I met his eyes. I have already taken too many days. If I delay, I will lose my courage. He sighed, but he did not argue further. Very well. I will draw up the documents. You will need to sign in person and we'll schedule appraisals. Once the sales are complete, you'll have choices. Yes, I said, quietly, rising from the chair. And this time, they will be mine. At night, after the house had gone still, I sat at my desk with a pad of paper and a fountain pen Arthur had given me on our 40th anniversary. I tried to write to my son. Dear Evan, the first draft began. By the third line, I was already crossing out sentences, smudging the page. You broke me with your words. I scribbled it out. I love you, but I can't stay. Crossed out again. Every attempt felt wrong, too raw or too forgiving, too sharp or too soft. I wrote 10 versions in all, the wastebasket swelling with bald paper. In one I pleaded. In another I accused. In several, I told him I would return someday. None of it was true, not anymore. By the end of the week, my hand cramped and my heart felt carved hollow. The letter I finally set aside was spare, pared down to the bone. Since I disgust you, I have decided to give you what you wanted my absence. Do not look for me. Do not expect anything. The house and all you imagined inheriting are gone with me. Goodbye, Mom. It felt brutal, but honesty often does. I folded the page and slipped it into an envelope without sealing it, as if some part of me still prayed I might change my mind. While the words drained out of me at night, the days filled with practicalities. I told the children I was busy with paperwork, and they accepted it easily enough. Evan didn't notice at all. Through Dr. Ruiz's contacts, I found buyers willing to pay cash for quick sales. Of course, urgency had its cost. The house Arthur and I bought for $50,000 in 1975, worth $350 on the market, I agreed to let go for $300 flat. The condos, each valued at $125, I signed away for $100 apiece. 3 weeks became a blur of signatures, notaries, and whispered instructions to agents who never asked why I wanted out so fast. The buyers were men in pressed suits who spoke politely, but eyed me as if I were an old woman desperate for liquidity. Maybe I was. At the bank, I requested transfers into cashier's checks, spreading the withdrawals over several days so as not to draw questions. The teller, a young woman with hair pulled tight in a bun, smiled warmly as she slid the checks across the counter. She didn't know that with each slip of paper, I was severing ties not just to property, but to a life. At night, I dreamed of Arthur. In one vision, he stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, watching me pack. "Are you sure, Marjorie?" he asked. I wanted to tell him no, that I wasn't sure of anything, but the truth was clear. To stay would be to accept humiliation as the background noise of my final years. On the 21st day, Dr. Ruiz placed a stack of documents before me in his office. "It's done," he said, sliding the last deed across for my signature. "You have liquidated nearly everything. What remains is under your control." My control. The phrase caught in my throat. I signed anyway, my hand steady at last. That evening, back at the house, I tucked the farewell letter into the top drawer of the kitchen desk, alongside a set of keys I no longer intended to use. For years, I had held back words, trimmed myself smaller, tried to be less of a burden. Now, the words that remained could not be trimmed any further. I ran my finger over the envelope, over the faint indentations of my pen strokes. I had crossed out, "I love you" 9 times. On the 10th, I had left only "goodbye." Once the sales were finalized, there was no turning back. The house still stood around me, but I already felt like a tenant waiting for the landlord to appear with an eviction notice. I moved through each room, deliberately gathering what I needed, leaving what I didn't, trying not to think about the echoes of a life Arthur and I had built together. The first step was the furniture. I didn't want Evan to think I'd vanished in a fit of rage. I wanted him to understand that this was deliberate, controlled. I called a discreet moving company recommended by Dr. Ruiz. Take only what's listed. I told the manager, a soft-spoken man named Darnell, who didn't ask many questions. I marked the items: the television, the stereo, the laptop. I used a few kitchen appliances and some personal keepsakes. Everything else, beds, bookshelves, the recliner where Arthur used to nap, I left behind. I wanted the emptiness to speak louder than any note could. At the bank, I split my withdrawals carefully. The bulk of the proceeds, $710,000 after sales and fees, was moved into cashier's checks. I asked for different denominations, not wanting to carry one slip of paper that could vanish too easily. A portion I wired into a new account I opened under my name at a credit union in Santa Fe, one Irene, my sister, had quietly vouched for. Still, I left a smaller account open here in Asheville with $50,000 in it. My lifeboat, I called it silently, a tether, in case Santa Fe collapsed around me, or if, God forbid, I needed to return, under circumstances I couldn't yet imagine. Closing out the utilities, the insurance policies, even the newspaper subscription, felt like erasing myself line by line. The clerk at the power company typed my cancellation with the efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. Forwarding address, she asked, without looking up. No, I said. My voice was steady. That night, I folded clothes into a single suitcase, pared down to essentials: jeans, sweaters, a few dresses for church. One of Arthur's old flannel shirts I couldn't bear to leave. Into a canvas shoulder bag went the envelope of cashier's checks, my passport, birth certificate, and a slim photo album of the children when they were small. I bought the ticket in cash at the Greyhound station, Asheville to Santa Fe, one way. The agent, a young man with a bored expression, slid it across the counter without question. To him, I was just another old woman traveling alone. To me, that anonymity was freedom. The day before departure, I walked through the garden one last time. The roses Arthur had planted still clung to their spring bloom's dew catching in their petals. I bent to clip one, tucked it into a glass on the kitchen counter. I wanted Evan to see it when he returned that evening, a final reminder that I had loved this place, loved him, loved the family we once were. The letter sat sealed beside it, the words pressed into the page like scars. On the morning I left, I waited until the children had gone to school and Evan had driven off to a job interview. The house was silent again, but not the same silence of 6 years ago. This silence carried intention. Darnell and his movers came at 9, sharp, efficient, and quiet, loading the marked items into the truck. By 10, they were gone. By 11, a taxi idled at the curb, the driver tapping the wheel impatiently. I carried my suitcase and bag down the steps without looking back. Inside the bag, the cashier's checks shifted slightly. Their weight, nothing compared to the decision they represented. At noon, the Greyhound pulled away its engine, rumbling low as the mountains receded in the windows behind me. I pressed my palm against the glass, not in farewell, but in recognition I had given everything I could here. Ahead lay miles of road and a city where no one knew my name, where I could begin again. Whether this was running away or walking toward something new, I wasn't sure. All I knew was that for the first time in years, the air in my lungs felt like my own. The bus ride to Santa Fe took more than a day each hour, pulling me farther from the life I had abandoned. The landscapes unrolled like a slow film forests, thinning into plains, rising again into dry ridges. By the time the bus pulled into the terminal, the air had changed. It was thinner, sharper touched with desert dust and pinon smoke. I stepped off carrying my suitcase, and for the first time in months, my shoulders felt lighter. I had arranged in advance through the credit union and a local rental agent to see a small casita a few blocks from the plaza. The owner, a widow named Carmen Torres, met me at the door. She was in her late 60s, quick-footed, with a voice that carried warmth without asking for anything in return. "It's simple, but it's clean," she said, showing me through the rooms. A kitchen no larger than my old pantry, a bedroom with a single window facing a courtyard where potted geraniums bloomed, and a living room with uneven adobe walls. The rent was reasonable, paid in cash each month. "I don't need more than this," I told her, and meant it. By evening, I was unpacking my modest belongings, setting Arthur's flannel shirt over the back of a chair, tucking the photo album into the nightstand. The envelope of cashier's checks I locked in a small fireproof box I had bought on the walk from the bus station. The house in Asheville had been too big, its silence too loud. Here, the smallness felt like shelter. The first days blurred with practicalities, setting up the bank account, buying groceries at the co-op, learning the bus routes. I cooked simple meals, lentil soup, scrambled eggs with green chile, and ate at a table that looked out into Carmen's courtyard. She often sat outside too, watering her plants, sometimes calling a friendly buenas tardes, without pushing for more. One afternoon, I wandered into the plaza, where vendors laid out turquoise jewelry on blankets, and tourists ambled with cameras. I felt anonymous in the best way, just another older woman among strangers. That anonymity soothed me. A week in, I met some of the other tenants in Carmen's building, 2 retired teachers from Oklahoma, and a widower named Harold, who shuffled slowly, but always had time to sit in the courtyard and talk about the weather. They invited me to join their Sunday lunch at a nearby diner. I went nervous at first, but found myself laughing at Harold's dry humor, listening as the others traded stories of lives they'd left behind. None of them asked too many questions about mine. At night, the silence of the casita was different from Asheville's. It wasn't the silence of tension waiting for footsteps in the hallway or a sigh of annoyance. It was the silence of space to breathe. One evening, I set the kettle on the stove. As the water heated, the whistle began to rise. For months in Asheville, that sound had filled me with dread tied to the morning Evan had looked at me with disgust. But here in this small kitchen, with its uneven tiles and faint smell of chile, the whistle startled me in a different way. My chest tightened for a moment, then loosened. I let it blow steady and high, and instead of fear, I felt something like release. I poured the hot water over tea leaves, inhaled the steam, and sat at the little table alone. The cup was warm in my hands. I thought of Arthur, of the home I had left, of the grandchildren, whose laughter I still carried in memory. The ache was there, but it was not all that remained. For the first time in years, silence sat beside me, not as an enemy, but as a companion. I sipped slowly, letting the quiet expand, and realized I had begun to breathe with my own rhythm again. Evan came home late that afternoon, the children tumbling in behind him, chattering about their day. He barely noticed the half-empty rooms until Caleb called out, "Dad, where's the TV?" Then he looked around the living room, stripped of the stereo, the computer desk bare appliances missing from the kitchen. On the counter, a single envelope waited, his name written in my hand. He tore it open, eyes darting over the short message I had written and rewritten so many times. "Since I disgust you, I have decided to give you what you wanted my absence. Do not look for me. Do not expect anything. The house and all you imagined inheriting are gone with me. Goodbye, Mom." The paper shook in his grip. He read it again, as if repetition might change the words. Caleb tugged at his sleeve, asking what the note said, but Evan crumpled it and shoved it into his pocket, his face pale. He went to the desk drawer, searching for deeds, bank papers, anything that would prove what I had left behind. There was nothing. The house was sold, the rentals gone. His mother's savings vanished. The inheritance he had counted on swept away in silence. That night, he barely spoke to the children. They ate sandwiches at the kitchen table, the absence of my cooking heavy in the air. Lydia looked at the empty chair and asked, "Where's Grandma? Did she go on a trip?" Evan muttered something about me needing time away, but his voice cracked. Caleb pressed harder. "When is she coming back?" "She's not." Evan snapped sharper than he meant, and the boy's eyes filled with tears. He left the table, slamming his bedroom door upstairs. The days that followed turned brittle. Lydia wandered the house, carrying her rabbit doll, whispering to it, as though telling secrets she once saved for me. Caleb grew quiet, his shoulders hunched as if he had aged years overnight. Every morning before school, he asked the same question: "Dad, did Grandma call?" Yet Evan's bitterness deepened. He went to the bank, to my lawyer's office, to anyone he thought might have answers. Each time he left angrier, more hollow. Without money, without comfort, all he had left was the echo of the last words he had spoken to me and the empty rooms that bore witness. At night, he sat alone in Arthur's old recliner, staring at the wall. The children's laughter no longer filled the halls. Instead, their voices carried a restless sadness. And in that silence, Evan began to understand that he had lost far more than an inheritance. He had lost the one person who had always been there no matter what. The letter remained in his pocket, crumpled and worn, its words burning every time he touched it. By the second week after my disappearance, Evan was no longer pretending I had simply gone away for a time. The panic in his voice when he called my sister Irene was less about worry than it was about assets. "She can't just sell everything like that," he told her. "She must have been coerced. Someone took advantage of her." Soon papers were filed in the county court. He claimed I had acted under duress, that I was mentally unfit to handle my affairs, that my sudden decisions proved confusion. He petitioned for guardianship, insisting the court intervene before irreversible damage was done. Irene called me in Santa Fe, her voice low and tense. "He's trying to paint you as incompetent, Marjorie. But Ruiz prepared everything properly. You'll be fine." Dr. Ruiz confirmed it when I spoke to him myself. "Mrs. Hale, every sale, every transfer was documented. You were evaluated and cleared before signing. No one can argue you lacked capacity. Your son's case is weak. He's not trying to protect you. He's trying to protect what he thought would be his." In Asheville, the hearings played out. Evan sat before the judge, presenting me as a frail old woman who could not possibly understand the magnitude of her choices. His attorney argued that I had been manipulated, that my sudden departure showed instability. But then Ruiz presented the signed contracts, the psychological evaluation, confirming my clarity of mind, the trail of deliberate steps leading to my decision. The judge's ruling was swift. There is no evidence of incapacity or coercion. The transactions stand. Petition for guardianship is denied. Evan left the courtroom pale, his lips pressed tight. He had expected to win, to wrest back the fortune already gone. Instead, he had only exposed himself. Even his lawyer's questions had revealed more than he wanted: his fixation on my properties, his repeated references to the inheritance he had counted on. Neighbors began to whisper. The children's teachers noticed his distracted anger, the way Lydia drew pictures of a grandmother missing from the table, the way Caleb kept his head down, muttering that grown-ups only cared about money. In his apartment, stripped of the comfort he had assumed would one day be his, Evan's bitterness hardened. Every attempt he made through the courts ended the same way: failure. There was no legal path to reclaim what he had already lost. And yet, he did not reach for the phone to call me. He did not write, did not apologize. He only cursed the silence I left behind, seeing not the mother who had gone, but the inheritance that had slipped from his hands. For him, the battle had never been about family. It had always been about what family could give him. And now that truth laid bare before the law left him more defeated than ever. The call came late, just as the desert twilight was folding into night. I had finished washing the single plate and cup from my dinner when the phone rang. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in my chest urged me to answer. Marjorie Irene's voice was tight, low, carrying that tremor she never used unless it was serious. "I'm here," I said, drying my hands on a towel. "It's Evan." She paused long enough that I could hear the clatter of her bracelets as she shifted the phone. "He's unraveling. He lost his job last week. He's drinking more than he should, not keeping up with the kids. And the children. They're the ones paying the price." My stomach turned. "What's happening with them?" Her voice cracked. "Caleb has stopped talking much. His teachers say he doesn't raise his hand anymore, sits in the back like he wants to disappear. Last night he told me he doesn't see the point of trying at school. He said, 'Grandma left, so what does anything matter?'" The towel slipped from my hands onto the counter. "Oh, God." And Lydia Irene continued. "She barely speaks. She hides behind that rabbit toy of hers. When I tried to hug her, she pulled away and said, 'Grandma didn't want me either.'" I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, as if that could block out the words. Images of Caleb's eager questions. Lydia's small hand in mine, they flooded back so vividly I had to sit down. "They think I left them," I whispered. "What else are they supposed to think? Evan hasn't told them the truth. He can't even say your name without spitting it. They're children, Marjorie. They can't separate your absence from rejection." I closed my eyes, feeling the kettle's whistle echo in memory, the moment I chose absence over humiliation. I had told myself I was reclaiming dignity, that silence was my protection. But now it seemed that silence was punishing the ones who loved me without conditions. Irene lowered her voice. "I know you left to save yourself. I don't blame you. But Caleb and Lydia are hurting. You should know that." I wanted to say it wasn't my fault that Evan's cruelty had pushed me out, that I had done what I had to. The words formed, but they withered before reaching my lips. Instead, I sat listening to the faint hum on the line, the weight of my choice pressing heavier than ever. "Irene?" I said finally, my voice unsteady. "Do you think I was wrong?" She sighed long and sad. "I think you were right to leave him. But children, they don't understand rights and wrongs. They only feel who is there and who isn't." When the call ended, I sat at the small table in my casita, the desert night creeping in through the open window. The geraniums in Carmen's courtyard swayed in the breeze, oblivious to my turmoil. I had fought so hard to claim respect, to prove I would not accept humiliation, and yet the innocent were bleeding for it. I stared at the photograph of Caleb and Lydia I had tucked into the corner of the mirror. Their faces beamed with trust, unguarded and open. I pressed my fingertips to the glass. Dignity had saved me. But what good was survival if it meant their laughter had dimmed into silence? That night, sleep did not come. I lay awake listening to the quiet, wondering if silence, once my shield, had now become the sharpest weapon in my hand. The call that pulled me home came just after dawn, Irene's voice breaking through static. "Marjorie, it's Caleb. He's in the hospital. They say depression. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. They found a note. It said he thought you left because he was a bad grandson." The words hollowed me out. I sat there with the phone pressed to my cheek, my suitcase already in the corner, as if I'd known this moment would come. By noon, I was on a plane bound for Asheville. The desert sun fading behind me, the mountains rising again ahead. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and tired hope. Irene met me in the lobby, her eyes swollen. "He's been asking for you nonstop. They said seeing you might be the only thing that lifts him." She led me down a corridor, her hand steadying me when my knees nearly buckled. When I stepped into the room, Caleb was smaller than I remembered, swallowed by white sheets, his arms too thin. He turned his head, and when he saw me, his eyes widened with disbelief before spilling over. "Grandma?" He whispered, his voice raw. He struggled to sit up, but I rushed to his side, gathering him against me. He clung to me as if I were the last rope on a cliff. I thought you left because I was bad. I thought you didn't want me anymore. I stroked his hair, kissing the crown of his head. My throat burned, but I forced the words out steady, firm. No, my love. No, I didn't leave because of you. You are the best grandson anyone could dream of. I left because of your father. Not you. Never you. He pulled back just enough to look at me, searching my face for cracks. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I thought silence was safer. Because I believed walking away would protect me without wounding you. The answers churned inside me, too heavy for a boy's fragile shoulders. I cupped his cheek instead. I should have told you, Caleb. I'm so sorry. But you must believe me, I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. His tears soaked my blouse. I missed you so much. Every day. I missed you too, I whispered. My heart beat against his temple, as if trying to pour strength into him. Lydia slipped into the room with Irene. She stood at the foot of the bed, clutching her rabbit doll. Her eyes were wide, wary, as though afraid I might vanish again if she came too close. Grandma, she said softly. I opened my arm, beckoning her. She climbed onto the bed, carefully settling on the other side of me, her small body stiff at first, then melting into my embrace when I didn't let go. I thought you didn't like us anymore, she admitted, muffled against my shoulder. Oh, sweetheart, I said, pulling both children close. You are the reason I've kept breathing. You are the reason I came back. You must never think I left because of you. I left because I couldn't bear the way your father treated me, but I never stopped loving you. Caleb's grip tightened, as if he feared I might slip through his fingers. Will you stay this time? I looked into his eyes, so much pain for 12 years old, and felt the weight of the choice pressing down. I had left to protect my dignity. Now I had returned because their innocence had been dragged into the fire. I meant only for Evan. I kissed them both and held them until their breathing steadied silently, promising that no child of mine would ever again doubt where they stood in my heart. The cafeteria at the hospital smelled faintly of burnt coffee and reheated casseroles. I carried a tray with a paper cup of tea, but my hands trembled so much I could barely keep from spilling. Evan had asked to speak with me alone. He was already at a corner table, slouched in the plastic chair, a man frayed at the edges. His beard was uneven, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes carried the gray exhaustion of nights without rest. I sat opposite him, the distance between us as sharp as a blade. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stirred my tea, though I had no intention of drinking it. Finally, Evan leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low. Mom, I've been awful to you. Cruel, even. I need to say it out loud. I said nothing. The silence pressed him to keep talking. When I told you those things, he continued, his hands tightening into fists. It wasn't because I truly believed you were disgusting. It was because I was drowning. After the divorce, after the debts piled up, I felt worthless. And every time I looked at you calm and steady in that house, it reminded me of everything I'd ruined. So I lashed out. At you, the only person who couldn't hit back. My chest tightened. You did more than lash out, Evan. You tore pieces out of me. His eyes closed briefly as if he couldn't bear to look at me. I know I did. And the truth is, the money made it worse. I kept thinking, if I lose everything, at least I'll have Mom's inheritance. At least the kids will. That thought got me through some nights. So when you sold it all, when you disappeared, it felt like the ground vanished under me. His voice cracked on the last word. He rubbed his face, ashamed. I thought of your money as a guarantee, and I treated you like an obstacle to it. I was blinded by greed. I see that now. I let the silence linger, letting his words settle. I watched him, the boy I had once tucked into bed after nightmares. Now a man confessing that his fear had turned him into a monster. Evan, I said at last, my voice steady. You didn't just lose money when I left. You lost me. You lost the trust that tied us together. I know, he whispered. And I can't fix that overnight. But Caleb and Lydia, they need you. They need us to try. I don't want them to grow up with this emptiness. I folded my hands on the table. If I stay, it will be on terms I set. I won't be humiliated in my own home. I won't be treated as a burden. Respect, Evan. That is the price of my presence. He nodded quickly, desperation etched into his face. Anything. Whatever you say. You also need to understand. I added my voice sharp enough to cut through his eagerness. I didn't bring all the money back. Most of it is beyond your reach in accounts you'll never see. If what you're after is wealth, you will always be disappointed. He flinched, but then gave a small, broken smile. I'm not asking for money anymore. I'm asking for another chance to be your son. I searched his face for signs of manipulation, of rehearsed remorse. All I saw was exhaustion and regret. But regret was not the same as change. We'll see, I said quietly. Words are easy. Actions will tell me if you mean them. For once he didn't argue. He only sat back staring at the table as if he understood how fragile this second chance truly was. The morning after our conversation in the cafeteria, Evan came to me with eyes still swollen from lack of sleep. Caleb was stable enough that the doctors had allowed him to rest without constant intervention, and Lydia sat with Irene, coloring quietly in the waiting room. I asked Evan to walk with me outside, away from the white walls and antiseptic air. We found a bench near the hospital garden. The sun was pale, the ground still damp from last night's rain. I folded my hands in my lap, steadying myself. If we're going to try again, I began, there have to be terms. Clear ones. Otherwise, we'll fall back into the same patterns and I won't survive that a second time. He nodded quickly. I'll agree to anything. Don't rush, I said sharply. Listen first. I drew a slow breath. The first condition is money. We will keep our finances completely separate. I will pay my own way, rent, food, utilities. I don't want to feel like a guest in my own life or a wallet in yours. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but I raised my hand. No arguments. I insist. Evan dropped his gaze. All right, separate finances. Understood. The second condition, I continued, my voice tightening, is zero tolerance for humiliation. Not a single word that cuts me down. If you so much as imply that I disgust you again, Evan, I will leave, and this time it will be forever. No explanations. No goodbyes. He swallowed hard, his hands clasped between his knees. I won't do it again. I swear. Swear all you want, I said softer now. But words won't save you. Actions will. He nodded, shoulders heavy with the weight of what he'd lost and what he might still lose. The third condition, I said, looking straight at him, is where we live. It won't be my old house, and it won't be your apartment. We will find neutral ground somewhere we both begin fresh, a place that doesn't carry the ghosts of what's been said. For a moment, Evan was quiet. Then he whispered, that sounds fair. I let the silence stretch before adding the last piece, one I hadn't shared in the cafeteria. And you need to know something else. I kept an account in Santa Fe untouched. Most of the money is still there. That is my safety, my lifeboat. If things turn again, I will not hesitate to use it and walk away. You'll have no chance of finding me next time. His eyes flickered. Guilt, shame, perhaps a flicker of relief that I was giving him any chance at all. I understand, he said, voice low. I leaned back, feeling the weight of the conditions settle into the air between us. They weren't a gift of forgiveness. They were the framework of survival, a contract etched in the fragile hope that maybe dignity and family could coexist. Evan stared at the ground, nodding slowly, as if he knew the rest of our lives depended not on apologies, but on whether he could live inside the lines I had drawn. We found the apartment on a quiet street not far from the river. It wasn't grand, 2 bedrooms, a narrow galley kitchen, and a living room that smelled faintly of fresh paint. But it was ours in the sense that neither of us had history inside its walls. The lease bore both our names. I paid my share directly to the landlord, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't living under anyone's favor. The children were the most cautious of all. Lydia trailed behind me as I unpacked, clutching her rabbit doll as though it might translate her fears. Caleb hung back, pretending to help Evan carry boxes, but watching me out of the corner of his eye, as if afraid I might vanish again the moment their backs were turned. I tried to keep things steady, cooking simple meals, taking the children on short walks to the park, near the library, letting them talk about school without pressing for more. I knew trust could not be rushed. One evening, a week after we moved in, Evan and I were in the kitchen together. He was helping chop vegetables while I stirred a pot of soup. Lydia sat at the table, coloring Caleb, thumbing through a comic book. It was almost peaceful, almost ordinary. Then I reached for the salt, too slowly. My joints ached that day, and my hand hesitated midair. Evan let out a short sigh, the sound of old habits threatening to surface. "Mom, you're so slow?" He stopped mid-word. His lips pressed tight. The children both froze their eyes, snapping to him. I turned to face him fully. His expression was stricken, his jaw working as though he was fighting against the muscle memory of years. He put down the knife, raised both palms in surrender. "I'm sorry. I was about to say something I shouldn't. I didn't mean it. Forgive me." The air in the kitchen seemed to shift. Caleb lowered his comic, slowly studying his father, as if seeing him through a new lens. Lydia's grip on her rabbit softened. Evan stepped closer, voice low but clear enough for both children to hear. "I hurt your grandmother with words I can never take back. I promised her I wouldn't do it again. Tonight I almost failed, but I caught myself, and I want you both to see me do better." I hadn't expected him to say it aloud, especially not in front of the children. For a moment, I simply held his gaze, measuring the sincerity. It wasn't polished. It wasn't for show. It was clumsy and raw, and because of that, it rang true. I nodded once. "Thank you for stopping yourself. That matters." The soup simmered behind us, filling the room with the smell of broth and carrots. Lydia slipped off her chair and wrapped her small arms around my waist. "Grandma." He didn't finish the mean word. "No, sweetheart," I said softly, stroking her hair. He didn't. Caleb set his comic aside and crossed the kitchen. He stood between his father and me, looking up at both of us. "So, you really are trying, Dad." Evan crouched to his son's height, his face pale but steady. "Yes, Caleb, I'm trying. And if you ever see me forget, I want you to remind me. Can you do that?" Caleb studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." The pot boiled over, then breaking the tension. I moved quickly to lift it from the stove, and Evan stepped beside me to help, this time with no trace of irritation. As we sat down to eat, the children glanced between us, their shoulders less tight, their voices a little freer. Trust was still fragile, like glass balanced on a table's edge. But that night, for the first time, I saw a glimmer of belief in their eyes, that maybe words could break, but they could also be caught before they cut too deep. The days in the new apartment found a rhythm slower and steadier than I dared to hope. Meals came at the same hour. Bedtime had its rituals again, and the air no longer bristled with unspoken tension. Even small things, the scrape of chairs, the clink of dishes, sounded lighter. One evening, as we sat around the table with bowls of stew, I noticed Caleb eating without his shoulders hunched. He wasn't darting glances at me or his father, waiting for a word sharp enough to cut the air. Instead, he told us about a science project at school, his voice rising with excitement as he described how he and a partner had made a model volcano. Lydia listened with wide eyes, occasionally poking her spoon into her mashed potatoes, as though they too might erupt. Evan listened, nodding, even smiling, though the smile carried the weariness of a man still learning how to inhabit it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct. And I saw Caleb notice that. The boy's gaze flickered to me, then back to his father, as if checking whether the rules had really changed. Later that week, Lydia disappeared into her room with paper and crayons. When she came back, she carried a poster nearly as tall as she was. She smoothed it on the table with great ceremony. At the top, in careful block letters, she had written, "Family Rules." Beneath, in uneven strokes of pink and green crayon, she had listed them. No insults, no yelling. Say sorry fast. Respect first. She had drawn 4 smiling stick figures at the bottom, labeled in her shaky hand, Dad, Grandma, Caleb, me. Even the rabbit doll had a corner perched beside her own figure with floppy ears. Evan stared at the poster for a long moment. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. That's good, Lydia. We should hang it where we can all see it." She beamed and ran to fetch tape, sticking it to the refrigerator. Caleb pretended to groan at her dramatics, but lingered by the fridge afterward, tracing the letters with his finger. For me, the poster struck deeper than any courtroom or contract could. It was proof the children were watching, not just hearing apologies, but seeing whether respect lived in our actions. Their eyes, more than mine, would be the judges of whether change was real. That night, after the children had gone to bed, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing bowls. Evan leaned against the counter, arms folded. He glanced toward the refrigerator where Lydia's poster hung. "She's right," he said softly. "I don't want to fail at that again." I kept my hands moving in the water, unwilling to let my voice betray how much those words unsettled me. "It's not just about not failing," I said. "It's about making sure they never have to wonder if respect is temporary." He nodded, eyes lowered. For once, he didn't argue or promise too much. He only let the silence stand, and that in itself was a kind of progress. In my room later, I sat on the bed with the small photo album I had carried from Asheville to Santa Fe, and back again. Pictures of birthdays, trips to the park, Arthur holding Caleb as a baby. I touched the worn pages and thought of the fragile thread we were walking. One misstep could snap it. But if held carefully, maybe it could strengthen again. Healing, I realized, wasn't a miracle. It was the quiet practice of choosing respect over and over until the choice became habit. The children had already understood that far sooner than their father. And perhaps it was their small, steady judgments, the watchful eyes of innocence, that would decide if this family could truly hold. The seasons turned again, softening the sharp edges of winter into the slow greening of spring. By then, the new apartment no longer smelled of paint and cardboard. It smelled of dinners cooked together, laundry drying on racks, and crayons scattered across the living room rug. Stability had settled in, not perfect, not unshakable, but present. The children were the ones who flourished first. Caleb's teachers reported that his quiet had begun to lift, that he was raising his hand again, answering questions with a spark of confidence. Lydia grew bolder, insisting on showing her family rules poster to every visitor who stepped through the door as though it were a proclamation of who we had become. Their laughter, once stifled, now tumbled freely, ringing through the rooms with a sound I had feared I might never hear again. Evan kept his word more often than not. The old sharpness lingered in him like an instinct ready to rise, but I saw him stop himself, breathe, redirect. Sometimes he caught my eye when he did it, as if asking for silent acknowledgement. I gave him a nod when he earned it, nothing more. Praise too easily given would have made the effort shallow. I remained cautious. I still kept my Santa Fe account intact, a lifeboat untouched. My name alone sat on the documents, my key alone opened the box where the papers rested. Freedom was not a thing I could risk losing again. Each night, after the children were asleep and the house had gone still, I wrote in my journal. Some entries were short lists of small triumphs notes about Lydia's drawing of a dragon that looked suspiciously like a dog, or Caleb's pride over a test grade. Other nights, the words flowed heavier, circling the weight of what had happened. One evening, I wrote a line that stayed with me. Wealth can be squandered, but dignity guarded becomes legacy. I underlined it twice. For decades, I had believed my legacy to Evan would be the money Arthur and I saved the properties we had built brick by brick. But now I understood that true inheritance was not measured in dollars. It was in the boundaries I set, the respect I demanded, the lessons my grandchildren would carry into their own lives. With that thought, I arranged something I should have long before. Quietly, through Dr. Ruiz, I established accounts for Caleb and Lydia's education. Monthly deposits from my Santa Fe funds flowed directly into those accounts, bypassing Evan entirely. He would never be able to touch them, never be able to mistake my love for the children as an extension of his entitlement. My legacy to them would be independence, not control. The months passed in this rhythm until one bright Saturday when we all drove up to the Blue Ridge Parkway. The children tumbled out of the car, racing ahead to the overlook, their voices echoing against the mountain ridges. Evan walked slower, carrying a picnic basket. He looked smaller against the sweep of the landscape, humbled somehow. I stood apart for a while, letting the wind brush against my face. The horizon stretched wide, layer upon layer of mountains, fading into haze. I thought of Arthur of Santa Fe, of the hospital, where Caleb had clung to me. I thought of the night Evan's words had carved me hollow in the kitchen. And then I thought of this moment, the laughter carried by the breeze, the strength of my own spine, unbent by humiliation. Better alone with dignity than together in disgrace. That truth had carried me through exile, through silence, through return. It would remain true for the rest of my days. I closed my journal on my lap, the ink still drying on the page, and tucked it back into my bag. Caleb called for me, then his voice high and eager. Lydia waving both arms in the air to beckon me closer. I walked toward them, steady and unhurried, each step a choice. The mountains stood silent witness as I joined their laughter, carrying forward not money or property, but the only legacy that could not be squandered, the boundary I had set, and the dignity I had reclaimed.